very special young lady who I'm going to cry already, who I had the opportunity to meet and get to know a little bit about in Israel, on our Israel mission back in October. And I couldn't be more prouder to call her up to the podium so that she can share her story with us. Alona Geysman, Federation Young
Wow, I'm just so happy and excited to be here with all of you. I know many of you know me as one of the Federation professionals, the girl that organizes those Wild D happy hours, we have one next Wednesday, and our Israel mission trips, and spams your inbox with Super Sunday phone-a-thon emails. But tonight, I'm really here to share my personal story with you, which will hopefully compel you to keep being involved in your Jewish community and continue giving because it matters. I know of at least one life that changed, my own. I was born in Ukraine in 1986. I did not discover I was Jewish until I was 8 years old. My classmates and I were actually walking home from school one day, and one of the girls announced that she heard from her dad and heard from our teacher that I wasn't Ukrainian, I was Jewish, and that I was no longer able to play with them because I wasn't like them, I was different. I didn't even know what Jewish meant. I didn't know what Judaism was because my family hid our identity for 2 generations due to the anti-Semitic attitudes and pogroms in Ukraine. But there I was, discovering what Jewish is, a negative term, and something that made me into an outcast. So I walked home alone that day, crying. I burst into my parents' apartment, accusing them of being Jewish. Because of that, I was now ostracized from my own social circle. It was a really difficult day, but I just couldn't figure out why they wouldn't tell me something like this. The only Jewish artifact I've ever known was a shofar in my grandfather's desk. But I always thought it was some sort of rustic decor, and nobody ever told me otherwise. And there I was, at the age of 8, starting to put my puzzle of an identity back together. In the following months, the Soviet Union fell apart, and life really worsened for all. There was no water, some days there was no electricity, there was no food on the grocery shelves, just criminal activity, corruption, and alcoholism on every corner. Inflation was high, salaries were withheld, people were really angry. My mother came home after a 3-month delay, and she received her owed salary for those 3 months. Unfortunately, on the overcrowded bus back home, her wallet was actually cut out of her purse along with the envelope with the cash in it. That was the evening my parents decided they needed to leave. My dad saw a post on the subway about Aliyah to Israel. He began attending free local Hebrew classes offered by one of the synagogues. And he also began selling off all our belongings at the local market every weekend. One of those weekends, he came home with a black eye and a gash on his right cheek because 3 men had followed him home and attacked him to rob him of the $10 that he earned selling my fur coat. Life was a violent chaos in Ukraine at that time, and the Jewish agencies on the ground helped my family and others tremendously. Someone helped to pay for our transportation to Kiev, to the airport. Someone else paid for our El Al airfare. Someone paid for my parents' UPAN Hebrew lessons, vocational services, our rent, and a stipend for a full first year in Israel as new immigrants. As a little girl, I often wondered, who could be so generous? Who paid for all this stuff and didn't even know us and the thousands of other families like ours? I know the answer now because I'm here with all of you and I work with our generous philanthropists. But back then, I deemed these people as our savior angels and my heroes. In 1994, just as my parents settled in, learned Hebrew, restarted their careers, and I assimilated and became a proud Israeli, the first intifada in Israel began. Our central bus station, mall, and downtown restaurants in Netanya were an often target of the Palestinian suicide bombers. The one time my father was late for his bus to work, he worked at Intel, the earlier one blew up on its way to Jerusalem. My mom was panicking for 3 hours, watching her news at the school, until my father finally got to his office and was able to phone her. There were no cell phones back then, but maybe that's why Israel invented the technology. My parents decided to use all the savings they have to buy a car. And a few months later, Saddam Hussein threatened to annihilate Israel with a chemical attack. After just short 4 years in Israel, my parents have had enough and made the decision to relocate to Canada. I cried at that Ben Gurion airport and vowed to come back as soon as I was older to never forget my Jewish homeland. Barely back on Earth, we once again received help from the Jewish Federation in Toronto. We were given warm clothes for those freezing Canadian winters. I received a scholarship for the JCC Arts Day Camp, and my parents were invited to employment and resume writing seminars completely free of charge. The Jewish community embraced us and helped us start over once again. Later on, after my graduation from York University, I went on Birthright, another free gift from our Jewish philanthropists. After spending several months in Israel, it was time to start my career. It was also time for me to pay it forward. My family and I always considered ourselves lucky, but I know it would not be so without the tremendous aid we received from Jaffe, JDC, the Israeli government, and of course the Jewish Federations of North America. I have been the poster child for all of these incredible organizations almost my entire life. And so, with my honors double major in law and psychology, I marched into Hillel of Greater Toronto and took the only job available at the time, a part-time position in administration. I was the administrative assistant at the Hillel. Within a year, I was an engagement associate. And we started our Russian, Jewish, and Israeli engagement program for students to connect with their Canadian Jewish community. We created a Russian-Canadian birthright trip, and UJA funded its first overnight sleepaway camp for Russian Jews. All while we were still combating anti-Israel protests, BDS movements, and all sorts of anti-Israel groups on the campuses in Toronto. Most importantly, I think, is that we developed the next generation of student leaders who were disconnected previously. And the Russian Jewish Hillel program continues to exist to this day in Toronto. As I continued to work for Hillel, often interacting with UJA, Birthright Foundation professionals, I became more and more fascinated with the world of fundraising and the wonderful philanthropists who supported our student projects and gave me my entire Jewish adult education. I decided to apply for a position here as a Director of Young Leadership at the Jewish Federation of Broward County, while still fulfilling my passion for Israel by organizing our missions and Birthright Israel trips. And here I am, 4 years later, and this is truly one of the happiest moments of my life. I share my story with you because I want to thank you. Many of you have been giving to this Jewish Federation for many years, and it was your generous dollars that helped my family through our journey, through our darkest times, and granted me the opportunities to be here tonight. Can you imagine where my family and I would be without you, our savior angels and my heroes? Whenever my own young leadership committee members are uncomfortably challenged to ask a peer for a gift, they always ask me, how come it's so easy for you to ask people for money all day? And I always recall, as I watched my own parents, who were middle-class, educated professionals, overnight reach a point where they had to uncomfortably ask for financial aid and even discounts on my school books, so they could afford to pay for rent, food, and secondhand clothing for themselves and their child. Now that's hard, that's embarrassing and uncomfortable. But being passionate about asking on behalf of those in need, that is the easiest and most rewarding job we have as leaders and professionals. I feel truly blessed to be here and to be amongst you. This year, I personally gave $1,500 to our own Jewish Federation, even though I work for a nonprofit salary and I have a wedding to budget for. But being philanthropic has only made my life richer. So tonight I ask you to join me. Join our community of strong, caring, and passionate women. Take out the pledge card from inside your name tag and write on it, increase your gift, ask your peers and BFFs to as well. If you're new to our community, your dollar a day commitment of $365 will make a huge difference to someone this year. When you're ready, my wonderful colleagues are going to be down the aisle and you can hand it to them. Tonight, we're not tasked with saving the entire global Jewish community, because according to the Talmud, if we can just save one life, it is as if we saved the entire world. I thank you for allowing me to share my story with you and for your incredible generosity.